welcome back to Singer Family Adventures. I am Valerie, and today I am just going to bring you some thoughts and cultural musings on the COPPA situation, meaning the new regulations coming down from the FTC on YouTube. Look, here we've got Biscuits. Hi, Biscuits. There's Biscuits in the shot. Yay. So I want to give you some of my thoughts, and to do that properly I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I am actually originally a cultural anthropologist, so I have a PhD in cultural anthropology, went to Syracuse University, before that went to University of Delaware. Fun random fact, Biden's not my top choice for the next election, not to get political, but Biden and I share something in common that not many people share. We both went to University of Delaware for undergrad and Syracuse University for grad school. Yay! So anyway, I'm a cultural anthropologist. Not everybody knows what that is, so if you do know already, please don't be bothered that I explain this. Cultural anthropology, or anthropology in general, is the study of humanity. Anthropology is a study of humanity all the way through time and all over the world. So that's where archaeology comes in, and prehistory and human evolution and biological anthropology and blah blah blah. As a cultural anthropologist, I'm interested in living cultures. And I did my research in Brazil. I'm getting to Disney, I promise. I know this is random. I lived in Brazil for a year and a half in 98, 99, and wrote my dissertation about Brazilian environmentalism and this amazing group of people that I lived with. That's another longer video. Anyway, I'm thinking quite a lot about what's happening with Disney and what's happening with Disney YouTubers specifically in relationship to these changes that are happening to YouTube, where we're supposed to designate in every single video whether something is for adults or for children. The cutoff line is considered 13. So if this would appeal to 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, we're considered safe to say that it's for adults. If it would appeal, which is very, very vague, to anyone under 13, to 10, 11, 12-year-olds, then it is considered a video for children. Now, enter anything to do with Disney, right? The Disney parks, Disney cruising, Disney merchandise, Disney movies, Disney collectibles, etc., etc. And there's really an enormous community out there of adults who are interested in Disney. We saw in July there was sort of the whole explosion in the media about these horrible childless millennials. What are these childless millennials doing at Walt Disney World and at Disneyland? They should be banned from the parks. If you don't have a child, don't come to the parks. That was a little short-sighted of the people who wrote it. But I will tell you my age. I'll be straight up front. I am turning 50 in the next year, so it's part of why I love the Aristocats so much. It came out the year I was born, 1970. So I am actually older than the vast majority of people who are in this Disney YouTube community. I would say, without knowing most people's actual ages, that the majority of people that I'm connecting with or watching or what have you, I think in terms of numbers, there's a huge group between, say, 25 and 35. Those are the millennials, right? Millennials love Disney. And then I would say the next biggest group is probably 35 to 45. You know, as an almost 50-year-old, I'm really older than most of y'all. Hi! I'm not putting on my grandma hat yet. But I'm one of those people that literally did not go to the Disney parks from 1974 until 2008, I think, is the first time I went back. So when I had Jonah was almost 5. So, you know, I never went childless. I still haven't gone childless. Now I want to go childless to the parks. But when I went back in 2008 or whatever it was, I was like, wow, Disney really does this well. Disney does what Disney does super well. So you all already know that. What I'm getting at is thinking about cultural changes that have happened, particularly in American society, which is partly what we're running up against when it comes to this whole issue of what are our Disney YouTube videos for, who are they geared towards, who's going to be watching them. You know, we all know that social media has been this enormous explosion, that it's caused a lot of challenges and problems and anxieties for the youth. It's caused a whole new round of bullying. It's caused higher suicide rates among kids. All of that is super sad and super problematic, and I think needs to be addressed as a society. And that's part of what the FTC is trying to do here. So the FTC, they are trying to protect children, so as much as we're aggravated by them, we understand, I think most of us understand why they're doing what they're doing. This is where our society does need to start regulating social media, but there's something that the FTC and those who are looking at the new rules that are coming out is not quite understanding, which is there has been, I believe, a cultural shift in America that has been happening sort of slowly, but more and more so over the past like 20 to 30 years. And that cultural shift is, one piece I think we all know is that, you know, kids and teens and preteens and childhood, those folks are interested in adult type issues younger and younger, right? So we've all talked about the violence in video games. What does it mean? When do kids get to watch sort of pseudo-sexual stuff on TV, blah, 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 blah. The innocence levels of our 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, I think are different than when I was a kid, even though I think we often overrank the innocence levels of when we were kids. But I do think that the internet has shifted that our children are exposed to more quickly. Our children become technological connoisseurs faster than us in many cases. So in many cases, our kids know how to use the internet better than we do. And so it's shifted sort of what childhood looks like, what later childhood looks like. It's actually less innocent than it used to be. I don't mean that as a bad thing, but I think that the lines are blurring between childhood and adulthood. Millennials also get an incredibly bad rap, just in pop culture in general. Sometimes I understand a little bit of that as a realtor, which is my current profession, of millennials who want the perfect house because maybe their parents had a lot of money and they were raised in the perfect house and they think at 25 they have a right to the perfect house. That stuff drives me crazy. But anyway, I also think millennials get a really bad rap because I think there's a way that that generation has sort of held on to childhood more. And I don't mean in the sense of being immature. I just mean in the sense of being engaged in pop culture. And I want to take you back to Brazil. There's a reason I mentioned Brazil before. When I lived in Brazil in the 90s, one of the things that blew my mind, that I was like, wow, when I first spent a summer in Brazil, I was 24 in 1994, you turned on the radio. And the radio in Brazil, pop radio at that point, you know, this is before the internet was everywhere, right? So there was no Spotify. But the radio station would play a Bob Marley song. Bob Marley was huge in Brazil. Then they'd play a Brazilian rock song from the 60s or 70s, MPB it's called. And then after that they'd play Frank Sinatra or something, totally random. And then after that they would play whatever the latest, like, you know, current rock was in the United States. So it was both international, but it was also hitting on music from all different decades. They'd play Billie Holiday, and they'd follow up Billie Holiday with Taylor Swift. I don't think Taylor Swift was out then, but you get the impression, right? And genres that we in America would think of as totally different, and more importantly, time periods that we would think of as totally divided. At least when I was in my 20s, I didn't know of radio stations that mixed up the time periods like that. So that was one observation that I made in Brazil at that point. And then I would go to concerts, I'd go to outings in fun places, and I would see, I was like 20 something, young 20s. I'd have friends who were like 20 going to a rock concert with grandma, and they weren't like embarrassed, or mom or dad. They weren't embarrassed to be with mom or dad or grandma. They were excited. They're like holding grandma's hand. Here's a 22-year-old holding grandma's hand, dancing together at the rock concert. And I was like, whoa. I had a really hip grandmother. I loved her dearly. She would not have gone to a rock concert. So what I realized in Brazil at that point, and I'm talking 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago, is that the generational divides of pop culture were almost non-existent. And when I talked to friends about it there, they were like, well, that's stupid. Why won't you listen to Billie Holiday or Frank Sinatra or, Bob Marley or, whatever. Why won't you listen to these old bands or old musicians or Jimi Hendrix? They're still good music. It's not no longer good music because it's 10 years old. You Americans are ridiculous. And I said, it's really generational in America that in America, a 15-year-old doesn't want to hang out with a 10-year-old, and a 20-year-old doesn't want to hang out with a 15-year-old. And it was less the case in Brazil. So there was sort of more mixing of generations and more mixing of pop culture. What I want to propose to you is that America has really gone in that direction in a way that I think is really good, with the millennial generation and to some extent Gen Z behind them, that the generational divides are not as strong anymore. And it's partly thanks to the internet. It's partly thanks to things like Disney Plus. I can sit down tonight with my 10-year-old and I can watch everything from Endgame of the Marvel movie all the way back to Snow White from the 30s, right? Or 1937, right? I can watch movies with him from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and he can appreciate them, right? So it's not as though we are as cornered in terms of our consumption of pop culture. Our consumption of pop culture allows us now to look at things from any time period. That also enables adults to enjoy nostalgia much more easily, okay? So that we can go back and watch the things that were hip when we were kids. And that's just really fun, And I think that what we see with the millennial generation is an awareness that you can be an adult, you can do adulting, and still be young at heart, so that you don't have to be consuming, and honestly, people are registering for weddings, they're registering for Funko Pops instead of fine china and fine silver, because they don't want fine china and fine silver and crystal. What are they going to do with that, right? They want Funko Pops to line their walls. And so it's just a shift in culture that's happening, but it means that the blur between what is appropriate for kids, what is not appropriate, and it's not just Disney, it's also things like, there's a whole genre now of adult cartoons, right? I remember when South Park first came out in the 90s. I was also in graduate school in Syracuse, and I remember going to a friend's house in Syracuse, and we had parties to watch South Park every week because it was so phenomenal and so bizarre. And the only thing anywhere close to South Park at that point was The Simpsons, which has been around for 30 years, which even The Simpsons was geared towards children, but more amusing towards adults than other cartoons. Well, now there are dozens of TV shows, Family Guy. What's the spin-off on Family Guy? I'm looking at Jonah.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Camp. Both my kids love Camp. Camp has the foulest language in it. Doesn't bother me. I got a foul mouth. I keep that off of YouTube, but I curse plenty. So, my younger son is watching Camp, and he thinks the foul mouth stuff is hilarious. The basic plot line is not that grown up. It's still pretty much a kid's show. It's borderline, but you've got a lot of cartoons now, a lot of animation geared towards adults. Video games, people don't stop playing video games when they hit 17, 18. And it's not just about the violence, right? It's not just that the older you get, the more you reach for the more violent games. It's that there's more and more and more sophisticated games out there, right? And so all of this kind of toy material has become so complicated and so available and so sophisticated that it's something that adults can really enjoy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I actually think it's healthy for us as a society to become more of a society where 17-year-olds and 27-year-olds and 37-year-olds and 47-year-olds can all sit down at a table together and have a conversation and have things in common and not feel like they're different species, right? America is more and more and more divided these days, and frankly, that's what drove me to Disney. Without getting too political again, I hate this administration. I went to Disney right after the 2016 election. It was such an escape for me to be somewhere where things were happy. And so I think that we are, whatever your political stripe, Republican, Democrat, left of Democrat, right of Republican, whatever, it's a tense time in our country. And with that tense time, I think people are grasping for pop culture, and they're grasping for happiness, and they're grasping for nostalgia, and they're grasping for child-esque stuff. Now, I haven't said anything that maybe you haven't already thought about. I haven't said anything that's going to be a solution for us as Disney YouTubers, but as Disney YouTubers, we represent a segment of the population that we're adults who love stuff that some people think is childlike, but it's not just childlike. It's not just childlike, it's imagination. Disney himself said imagination has no age, right? So it is creativity. It's a form of creativity that we love, that we want to engage in, that we want to collect, that we want to experience. We want to go on roller coasters. I would love to spend my 50th birthday at the parks. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see. All this to say, I really think that the love of Disney that adults have is part of a larger cultural shift where many adults in America are enjoying stuff that is not just for kids, that sort of the imaginative world and the childlike blurs into adulthood, and that's okay. And it's okay partly because adulting is hard, right? Adulting is hard, period. And so, we are enjoying the childlike, but it doesn't make it childlike. It means that as a culture, we're really starting to connect more across ages. That's a good thing. We're becoming more and more divided by class, more divided by race, more divided by gender, by religion, blah, 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 right? And all that makes me very deeply sad as a cultural anthropologist. I think we're all human. We all have something to contribute, and we should all connect to each other. But, I think if Disney is a way that we can connect through our love of childhood stuff, that's great. And it's not just Disney. It's a lot more than that. It's a way that, well, you get my point. I think that this is part of the challenges that we are up against. I am hoping that YouTube does not take a massive nosedive. I don't care at all about monetization. I don't think I'll ever get there. I would like to get to 200 subscribers, and I'm awfully close. So help me out if you're not subscribed yet and this is interesting to you. Please hit subscribe. Please hit that like button. I would love you to comment below. You can still comment below because this video is not for children. But anyone thoughtful who's 13 or older who wants to watch it, I appreciate you being here. 13! That was my son who's younger than 13 in the other room. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Go spread a little kindness. Go connect with someone who's not within 5 years of your age because, it's a good thing to cross generations. It's a good thing to bond between the young and the old. and have a lovely, lovely Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for you guys. Bye-bye.